Mr. OC back again with the table saw operation and safety. So we've kind of talked about the ripping, the cross cutting. We're using this thing here, what was that called again? The rip fence. A lot of people say it's a fence, like in your yard, because something goes up against it, it traps it in. So rip fence, rip because you're ripping with it. So that's called a rip fence. We cross cut using the, let's see, what was this thing here again? So down here it has a little scale on it, the miter scale. And again, it goes in the miter slots. Imagine that, there are miter slots in the miter scale. And to cross cut, you would lay your board against here, hold up against there. They also make what they call a sled that you can cross cut with. Sled's a big piece of wood that usually is for larger pieces. There's two miter slots. They'll have a groove that goes into both where you can cut wood cross cutting more accurately. We're fortunate we have a miter saw in the shop, so we really don't do a lot of cross cutting on here. The blade should be no more than a 1/4 inch above the wood. So I lay it before I start. Right now it's too high, so I'm going to use the elevation wheel, unlock it, bring it down to about a 1/4 inch or the height of a saw blade tooth. Lock it back in so it doesn't move on us. So now I've got my blade height set. Of course, when we're cutting, it's going to come past the splitter and the anti-kickback fingers. Don't ask me how they got their name. Splitter makes sense, splits the wood. Guess that's supposed to look like fingers, get little points on it. Anti-kickback means it doesn't come back at you or kick back. When I am cutting, a couple of reminders, I'm standing to the side of the saw blade, so if it does kick back, it doesn't hit me. Worst case, it hits my shoulder. You'll notice most schools or shops have their table saw set up when there's nothing behind it. So when you're positioning your saw, you would set it up with its, ideally with no workbenches or anybody right behind it working on a regular basis. Saw guard should be down while you're cutting. If you're doing a special cut like a dado cut uses what they call a dado blade, D-A-D-O. And that's where you stack blades together to get 1/4 inch wide to 1 inch wide cut out of a board. You'll see a lot of times bookshelves have them, but it's where you're cutting halfway through the board but not all the way through. And then that's a special setup where you can't use the guard. So a dado cut would be like if I made a, you can see it on the video, notch out of here, or say a bookshelf to set into. So you'd have to have a wide blade on there. I would lay it down to do my cutting with. Of course, I can't have the guard splitter on there because this board's not cut in two, so it'd stop as soon as it hit that. So that's where I'd have to remove the guard, splitter, and setup, and that'd be considered a special setup, which needs teacher approval to do that. It's fairly easy to do. There's a little lever here. I've got it turned off. Pull this up. There's a lever here I can lift up. And I lift this out of the way. Push this back down. There's little teeth here that go underneath the others, so that keeps it from lifting up on you. Slides back in, and then I'm set where I can cut without it. Of course, there's no freehand cutting. You must use either the rip fence or the miter gauge. You can't just say, oh, this looks good here, I'm going to cut it about here, just line up and cut it. If you get any little twist or turn or anything, it's going to bind and throw it back. And hopefully not pull your hand in when it does it. So no freehand cutting, must use fence or miter gauge. If you're using the fence and miter gauge at the same time, meaning you need pieces cut the same width, you must use a spacer block in there. Something to get space in there so that way when it's cut, your wood's not trapped between here with nowhere to go except for throwing back, because it will twist or turn with the vibration. And the saw's going to say, this isn't happening, it's going to throw it out of there. So hopefully you're standing clear if it does that. But you use a spacer block. It's anything you put between the fence, then you come up, and now you've got that space, and it's going to go into the space. Of course, you need to wear safety glasses all the time. When I'm working, I should be the only one in the work area. You need to keep a clean work area. The only time somebody can be in the work area with you is if they are on the tail end side, or if you have a really long board and they're helping balance the end of it, so that way when it's coming through, all they're doing is balancing the end. Again, they're not grabbing hold of it, they're not pulling it, because the operator's doing all the work. Because if they grab hold of it, if they give a little twist or anything else, you're going to risk a kickback or pushing up or down. So all they're doing is just balancing the end of it, so they never pull the stock through. while it's being pushed through. The operator does all the work. This here I didn't really talk about. It's a vacuum hose. It's like a big vacuum cleaner in the room. This tube that comes down from the ceiling has a vacuum tube that comes underneath here. It catches a lot of sawdust as you're cutting, so that way it's not on there. So we'll turn the vacuum on at the beginning of each hour. Now eliminate a lot of the sawdust particles in the air. Push sticks, I'll usually keep over here on the side or up here ready to go when you're getting ready to cut. If the board is less than, how many inches again, do we need to use push sticks? Less than 6 inches. So if the stock is less than 6 inches, use the push sticks. My teacher used to tell me less than 6, use the sticks. That way you have room between your fingers, the saw blade. This little red plate around the saw blade is called a throat plate. Fingers should never be within that red throat plate area while the saw is running. Fire switch, when you're off, turn it off, or when you're done, you turn it off. And the biggest mistake I've seen students make is when they're cutting, a lot of times instead of cutting past the blade, as soon as the board's cut here, they leave it here and they stop instead of pushing it on past the blade and splitter. That way, because if you leave it touching the blade, there's a chance it's going to vibrate and want to kick back on you. But that pretty well concludes the table saw. Biggest thing is be smart about what you're doing, pay attention. Don't do anything crazy just because of peer pressure. The old school I taught at, there's another school in the building. I won't talk about the high school by Worlds of Fun, but a student ended up cutting their fingers off, more or less on a dare. Somebody another student dared them to raise the saw blade as high as it go. So they came over and they raised it as far as it would go up. They dared them not to use the guard, so they had the guard off. They dared them not to use any push sticks. And they were to cut a board that was 2 inches wide, so they had it set up at 2 inches, which is about here. And they cut the board without any push sticks, and just coming up here and cutting it. Of course, they said the student knew that was crazy, he wasn't gonna do it, but then he got double dog dared and had to really think about it, and he got triple dog dared, so he had to. So then he cut it. They said he got by with it once, but then he did a second time, and then he got his fingers in the saw blade and ended up losing, I think they said all 4 fingers the same height as his pinky finger now. So he won the dare, he just didn't have any fingers. And I know a lot of people, oh, I'll sue the school district, I'll sue them, I'll get this. And he did. And he got his medical bills paid. Like he said, he got all his medical bills paid and $10,000. But to me, my fingers are worth a lot more than any kind of amount of money, because he was only a junior in high school at that time. So anyway, just think about what you're doing, pay attention, don't get in a hurry. And if you see somebody doing something crazy, say something to them, say, hey, hey, maybe you should do this or that, or you can say something to me or another adult. I'm not gonna come back and say, well, so-and-so said you're doing this. I'll just say, hey, I heard this is going on, or just a reminder about this. So a lot of us paying attention, not horse playing around, and being smart. If you're not sure about something, don't hesitate to ask. It's better to ask than to try something you're not sure about. But anyway, that is it for here. If we were to do a quiz on here, some of the quiz questions I'm going to do in review. And the way the test setup would normally do it is a word bank with it, and then test you fill in. Some of the questions, for example, are what is the height of the blade above the stock? Meaning how high should the blade be above the stock is the wood, of course. Should be 1/4 inch, so 1/4 of an inch above it. So right now it's obviously too high. I would definitely want to lower it down. And again, you don't have to get a ruler and measure it. You can just go by the thickness of the saw tooth. By doing this, if I do slip, I'm nicking my hands, I'm not cutting my fingers clear off. The less contact in the wood, the less chance of a kickback, because right now it's only touching the wood between here and, I'll put on the end, here and here. If I raise the saw blade all the way up, you've increased the contact surface amount by, of course, it'd be double that. So now I've increased it, so there's more likelihood of a kickback. So 1/4 inch above the blade. Always cross cut using this thing is called a miter gauge again, M-I-T-E-R gauge. Miter gauge is for cross cutting. And then always rip using the rip fence. So you're using one or the other, or if you're doing a combination, you need to have a spacer block in there. When ripping, always push the stock past the blank, letting it fall on the floor or an assistant catch it. Push it past the, of course, this case would be the blade, or if you have the guard anti-kickbacks on there, you want to push it past the anti-kickback fingers. Again, that's these little pieces with the points on there that the wood grabs into to help prevent a kickback. Again, from what I've read, they work about 80 to 90% of the time. But I'm not going to sit here and, okay, I'm going to go ahead and stand here because I know that if it kicks back, that may catch it. I'm going to pretend it's not there and work as if it wasn't there. Always stand to the blank of the saw blade. We'll stand to the side of it. If it does kick back, it's not hitting you. Feed the wood past the blade with a blank speed rate. Basically, you're going slow and steady. You don't want to go too fast where you're trying to race through there. Since you want to tear instead of cut, but you don't want to crawl through too slow either. It's just going to want to burn and overheat the work. So kind of a slow, steady speed rate. So feed it with a slow and steady speed rate. Of course, you must wear safety glasses when operating the machine. And basically, if anybody in this room is working, will need to wear safety glasses. Reason for that is if I'm cutting over here and I'm wearing safety glasses and, say John is sitting over there at the table and I have a kickback and it hits the wall and bounces over, I don't want to hit somebody else in the room and then them not have eye protection on. So if anyone in the room is working, you need to have eye protection on or safety glasses. When can the helper pull the stock through the table saw? So what we're asking is I have a really long board and I've got somebody helping tail stock. When can that person pull the stock through? Of course, the answer, if you remember, is never. All they're doing is balancing it. They're never pulling it through. So they can never pull it through. Make sure at least blank edge is straight prior to running it through the saw. So how many edges of the board need to be straight before you start it into the saw? Need at least one straight edge. You look at this board, you see where the end is kind of boogered up. If it's not straight and you're starting to put a crooked edge on the straight edge, it's still going to cut crooked. So you would have to cut it, get a straight edge, or use the joiner to put a straight edge on it. So you need to have at least one straight edge when you're running it through. And make sure the end you're keeping is the straight edge. I've seen people keep the bad edge by mistake, so that's the thing to double check. Always shut the power off and let it stop before blank small straps. Again, before removing small straps, reaching and grabbing something, turn the power off. Wait till it stop. I'm going to turn it on just for a second so you can kind of see how long it takes to stop with the saw blade up where it's maybe easier for you to see. Once I get my red light to start, or green light. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on. Turn it off and it's still running, so it's still running. So even though it's off, it's still running, you're still coasting to a stop. So even if it's coasting, it'll still cut your hands if you get into it. So make sure you wait the time. I mean, it's what, probably 10 seconds, but still 10 seconds is a long time. I've seen people turn power off, reach right in to try to grab something. So make sure it's at a complete stop before you remove any straps or small pieces. And then of course we talked about kickbacks. Could be a question that says, when ripping stock, you should push the piece that is against the fence clear of the saw blade and onto the outfeed table. Of course, outfeed table is going to be here because we're going out. So you're feeding it out, outfeed table. Failure to do so may result in a blank, a kickback. And again, a kickback is where your board goes in, gets twisted, and it'll throw it back at a high rate of speed. It's not, I mean, you're not going to have time, oh, if it comes back, I'll jump out of the way. It's a split second. You won't even know what happened. You'll sit there, next thing you know, it's like, whoa, where'd the board go? What happened? Because it's such a high rate of speed, so fast that it'll kick it back before you know anything happened. But that's the general safety. So we will wrap up from here and then do some more discussion later on. Thank you for your time on watching this, and we will see you next class period.